Hello, Bible Fiber listeners. Today we are doing something new that will become a monthly feature. Bible Fiber is starting up interviews with Bible scholars, archaeologists, and historians as part of a series we are calling Bible Fiber BFFs. Our first guest is someone who I have pretty regular interaction with, as he is the provost of the seminary I attend, the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas. Dr. Stripling is also the Director of Excavations for the Associates for Biblical Research at Khirbet el-Maqatir in Shiloh, Israel. And we are catching him before he heads off to Israel for another excavation in Shiloh. Welcome, Dr. Stripling.
Hi, Shelley. Thank you for allowing me to be your first guest on the new podcast. I'm honored.
You were a natural choice. So, before we get started with what you're doing in Israel this summer, can you remind our listeners why Shiloh is so critical to biblical history? What was Shiloh in the Bible?
Well, Shiloh is pivotal because at the end of the conquest period, the last place that the Israelites go to trigger the end of the conquest and the beginning of the period of the judges is Shiloh. So it's this transitional site. And so Joshua 18:1 says that Joshua had the tabernacle erected at Shiloh. And so this becomes the center of Israelite life and worship for over 3 centuries. He immediately has the tribal allotments given out from the entrance of the tabernacle there, and people begin to make pilgrimages to Shiloh for a long, long time. So that's why it matters, because the Ark of the Covenant is there, the presence of the Lord is there, the table of the bread of the presence of the Lord, all these things that we read about. You come to Shiloh when you want to connect with God. Sadly, there was a lot of apostasy during this period. The Bible reflects, and the archaeological record reflects it as well. And we see that same thing at Shiloh. But during this period, there are bright spots. You see people like Hannah and Elkanah and Eli and, name Samuel, names that are very familiar to us, interacting. Ultimately, once Shiloh is destroyed, it still continues to play an important role. You have like Ahijah the prophet is there, and you have different stories about people coming to inquire from the Lord at Shiloh. And then a really sad verse in Jeremiah 7:12, go now to Shiloh, see what I did there, and make it known. In other words, Jerusalem, don't think I won't judge you. I mean, look how much I love Shiloh, and I allow them to be judged. So what we're doing, Shelley, as you know, is we're excavating through 9 levels at ancient Shiloh, starting at the early Islamic period, if you will, and then down to the Byzantine period, late Roman material, and then early Roman or New Testament times, and then back into the Hasmonean period, Persian period, Iron 2, Iron 1, Late Bronze Age 2, Late Bronze Age 1, and Middle Bronze Age 3, and then Middle Bronze Age 2. So the deeper we go, the older the material gets. And so now at Shiloh, after 5 seasons of excavation, we're in a really deep context and we're able to see the stratification. So super exciting.
How many years have you been excavating at Shiloh? I know you said 5 seasons, but how many years is that equivalent to?
Well, I drove the first stake in 2016, and then we began excavation in 2017. We missed 2 seasons during the pandemic, and we thought we might miss this season. But if all goes well, this time next week, I'll be packing my bags and getting ready to head off. And we'll, of course, have a smaller team than we've had in the past because there is conflict going on in the country right now. But we'll take the group that we have, which will still be pretty good size, maybe 75, 80 people, and we will work and accomplish whatever we can this season. But this will be our 6th season of excavation, and I anticipate that we need about 4 or 5 after this season, maybe 4 more seasons to complete the area and to answer the initial research questions that I had.
I don't think most people realize where Shiloh is and
Mhm.
why it logistically might be a challenge this summer during a war
Mm.
time. Not that you haven't dealt with that before. So, can you explain just what the daily dig process looks like logistically?
Okay, well, the backdrop is Judaism area, and so in modern vernacular, this is often called the West Bank. But in 1993, the terminology changed again into areas A, B, and C. And so area C is under complete Israeli control, and that's the area where Shiloh is located. But it gerrymanders all throughout. So you have areas A and B next to area C, very, very close proximity. So that's why there's some challenges that are there. The Shiloh is actually extremely safe. I mean, we have a massive security fence all the way around the modern community and the archaeological site. So we even leave our tools and our squares at overnight, which is unheard of. So it's extremely safe, even though it's tucked into the middle of this area that maybe some people might think is not as safe. Now, interestingly, statistically, it's actually much safer than the city you live in and the city that I live in. So, here in Houston, I guarantee you there were people who got killed last night in Houston. Nobody heard a word about it. But if somebody is killed in Israel, the world hears about it. There's just a lot of focus. So, we're in the middle of conflict, but conflict has always been there and it continues, and trying to be a light and to do good academic research. Now, to your question, what does a day look like in Shiloh? It starts early. We leave our hotel at 4:59, wheels up, and we arrive at the site about 5:30, 5:35 as the sun is rising. This is, of course, to beat the heat. And some summers in Israel, as you know from me in the Negev, at Ben Gurion, could be very hot. Others not so much. Like last summer was really not that hot, and maybe this summer won't be either. But that's why we start so early, is typically because we want to beat the heat. And we work until about 10:30 when we have lunch. Because when you have breakfast at 4:30, you're hungry by 10:30. And we have great food, really, delivered to the side, burgers or pizza or schnitzel, and Philly steaks and things like this. I say Philly steaks without the cheese because we have to add our own cheese.
Kosher.
We have to be kosher. But really good food. We work then until about 1 o'clock, and we sound the shofar, and that signals the end of the workday proper. And then it takes us about 30 minutes to wash the day's pottery, get things organized, and fly our drone, get our shots for the day and stuff like that. Volunteers walk back to the front where we actually have a coffee shop, and they can get ice cream or drinks and things like this. And there's actual civilized bathrooms, not the porta potties that we have next to our site. And all this is really very civilized because our previous excavations at Khirbet el-Maqatir, I mean, there were no bathrooms, there was no running water, there certainly was no ice cream bar at the end of the day. So, people who were with me way back on that dig, they always tell the new people, you guys don't know what you're complaining about. These are the good old days. So we leave Shiloh about 2, and takes about, because of traffic in the afternoon, maybe an hour or 45 minutes or an hour to get back to our headquarters. And at 3 o'clock, when we get back to the hotel where we have an office and lab set up, we read objects, the things that we have discovered, non-pottery objects, from that day and maybe the day before. And volunteers love to sort of, be around the circle and watch, because these are really interesting things. And, some of things they excavated, maybe it's a gold star, or it's a pendant, or a bula, or a scarab, or something like that. We analyze them, take them through our protocols. And then volunteers are free. They have a little bit of free time. Staff has some meetings and work and things that we need to do. Every other day, we have a team meeting at about 5:30. It's a short lecture. And for us, it's a time of devotion, reflection, and sort of strategy. And then we give them every other night to just have a little bit of free time to go explore as well. And then it's get to eat dinner and get to bed as early as you can, because the next day is going to start early.
Does that change? Like, what has to happen in Israel that would potentially cancel the
Mm.
dig? I mean, they are actively at war now, but I'm assuming it would have to get worse.
So, correct. As it stands, we are licensed through a subsidiary of the Israeli government. It's called the Civil Administration of Judea. Samaria is in charge of the antiquities of Area C. And so they issue the license, and then it's in my name. ABR, Associates for Biblical Research, is the sponsoring organization. And then we have different universities that work under or as a part of that consortium. In their estimation right now, it is safe for us to be there. Shiloh's a long way from Gaza, And there's never been anything projected from Gaza that could come anywhere close to where Shiloh is. We're also a really long way from the northern border where the tensions are with Hezbollah. So, but if there were to be, some sort of an intifada in the West Bank, then they certainly could pull our license and say, hey, you guys are not going to be able to dig this season. During Khirbet el-Maqatir excavation for 8 seasons during the second intifada, we were not able to dig. And so that can happen. So you never know. I mean, we're not in control of wars and pandemics and things like this. And so when we can dig, then we do. Yeah.
Right, right. It's never been easy, I'm sure. So how many volunteers do you have, and is it too late for people to volunteer?
It's never too late, Shelley. Even for you. Um, we just someone who signed up today. Last year we had 222 registered volunteers plus day volunteers and groups too, the largest group that we've ever had. This year it looks more like we have 75 as of today. But most of them are staying for the whole time, which helps. But they can still get in. Just go to digshiloh.org, digshiloh.org, and they'll find the details. And if somebody tells them that it's too late to register, tell them I said it's not too late. I said they could do it.
And it's not just El Al that's flying to Israel now. Are there a couple of airlines down?
Most of us are flying on United. Some have connecting flights through Europe, Lufthansa, and other airlines, but United flights are still holding. We'll see what happens, in southern Gaza the next few days, and if that affects flights. But I'm supposed to fly out on May 14th, Israel's Independence Day, and so I'm certainly hoping that my United flight holds. But El Al plus United, and then plus some of the European connections are all flying into Israel.
Okay, so May 14th, you get there. And what is the first day that the dig starts?
May 19 is setup day. So we take a group of, oh, I don't know, maybe 40 or so out to the site on that day. And this is where we're going to organize everything and get our sifting stations up and, our tools organized and make sure the iPads are working properly, restring squares, clean up and get everything organized. So when we arrive the next morning, we're ready to roll. So May 19 is setup day. May 20 is our first day of excavation.
Okay. What are you anticipating this season? Is there something that you're dreaming of?
Oh, I'm dreaming, all right. There are 3 areas that have my attention, and they're all interrelated. One is a monumental building from the tabernacle period at Shiloh, which appears to match the dimensions given in the Bible for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. It orients east-west and has cultic material associated with it. We're now finding murex shells, which is, of course, where you get the purple dye for priests and garments. They're in ceramic pomegranates and a demolished horn altar and other things that suggest to me that it was a cultic building. So you start doing the math. It's from the tabernacle period. It has the dimensions. It's east-west and has these cultic accoutrements. Um, Suffice it to say that has my attention, and so we have a lot of focus on that building, and it's preserved to 2.5 meters or so, so very well preserved. For your listeners who are familiar with the Mishnah, the Seder Olam, which is second century AD, in 2 places, and Seder Olam and Zevayim both say that there was a permanent building built at Shiloh with a tent over it as a roof. And that's what it looks like we may be excavating in this building. The second area is just a bit to the north, and it's a gate complex, what appears to be a gate complex. And so if we're right, maybe we'll have clarity this summer, then this may very well be the gate that's mentioned in the biblical text where Eli is, when he meets the end of his life. And then on the eastern edge of the site, we have a Fabisa, a sacred bone deposit that I think is associated with this building, with the sacrificial system, full of thousands of bones and the pottery from the period of Joshua and just after the time of Joshua. So those 3 areas are where we're going to be laser focused this season and then the following seasons, because that really ties off my original research questions. I'm just very fortunate, Shelley, that where I chose to start digging happened to really be the sweet spot of what we were hoping to be able to research. And so if not, we could have been like Ehud Netzer Herodian for 35 years, but it looks like we're really where we had hoped to be, fortuitously. And so, if all goes well, we'll do these 5 more seasons, and then we'll work on publications. It takes, of course, 5 to 10 years to finish our publications on all.
In terms of just tricks of the trade, can you explain to people if there's a bone deposit, how do you know that that's a sacrificial area and not just from consumption?
That's a great question. So we we have the, the quantity or the thickness of bone. It's bone on top of bone on top of bone. Whereas normally we have X percentage of bones in an archaeological square, whereas this is just multiples of intensity of the bones. We have maybe 10,000 or more bones out of this area, and they're all kosher bones. And so in our stratum, prior to stratum 6, so we have 8 and 7, you have about 4% pig bone, for example, in those strata. And then later up here in our stratum, 2, 3, and 4, which are Christian periods of Christian occupation, we have pig bone of about 4% as well. But in between there, and if I can use an ethnic term, in Israelite strata, then we have 0% pig bone, or effectively zero. There may be a stray bone here or there. Well, that suggests something. It talks about a dietary change. So these are young animals. They're disproportionately from the right side, and there's no unclean animals mixed in among them. So those things together, and then the pottery and objects, like we find gold. We already have 5 gold pieces out of this Favisa area, and gold is extremely rare on archaeological sites because people in the ancient world didn't just lose gold, and many archaeologists have worked their whole career and never find anything gold. And so just out of this one area, we already have five gold objects, primarily stars, gold stars. So it seems like these are offerings, and the pottery, like chalices and things that we would associate also in the cultic context.
And what about the mollusk? How does that indicate that it could have been a holy site?
Um, uh, the the shell that I'm talking about.
Right.
Okay, so the priestly garments are made with this dye from the murex shell. And so down at Dor on the coast, you have a factory, that has been excavated. And so along the coast, of course, you're going to find these because they're marine, but then you have actual production sites. And we know from the biblical text and extra biblical texts that they're taking the gland from this murex shell. And it takes a lot of these to make this, to get the purple blue that makes the priestly garments. So it's not that a murex shell by itself is significant, but it's that we're in the central hill country, in the highlands of Israel. How are you getting something marine that is there? And then you have the Bible says, of course, and this is what we do. This is what biblical archaeology is all about, whether people like the term or not. We have a biblical site, and it has a narrative. It tells us about something that happened historically, and then we check to see if there's verisimilitude. Does the material culture that we're excavating match what we would anticipate that it would be? So if indeed there were priests at Shiloh for 3 centuries and they were wearing garments that were dyed with blue, then what might we expect to find? Murex shells.
What is the pushback that you ever get? So if you're we know that Tell Shiloh is Shiloh, so you don't get any pushback there, which is already putting you at advantage compared to other
Mm.
archaeologists. But what do people say in terms of, what do other biblical secular scholars say in terms of the Mishkan could or could not have been at Shiloh?
Right. Well, we do have pretty broad agreement, even from all spectrums of minimalism and maximalism and so forth. Let's just say that, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem agree that this is likely biblical Shiloh. Now, how seriously some scholars take the biblical text. What was this just written much later? Some might say, and it's a cultural memory, or was it a literal description of something that happened? There's some disagreement about that, but our situation is kind of unique because it appears that this is a tent at the beginning, but in the biblical text, you see in 1 Samuel 3 that the language changes, and you're no longer talking about temporary language of a tent, but permanent language of a building. It refers to the temple of the Lord and the house of the Lord and the doors of the house of the Lord, like delet in Hebrew. So this is not the temporary language that we've read about before about the tabernacle. So your hints come originally from the biblical text, and then the two portions that I mentioned, the Zebayim and the Seder Olam, both mention the same thing. And so it wasn't a foreign idea to us that there might be a building that was built there, quasi tabernacle temple, if you will. But here we come along as archaeologists, and we begin to excavate a building that seems to match that idea. So that's how archaeology comes along and illuminates the text. But, by itself, if we excavated that building, we would have to be much more tentative in our identifications. But when we have three ancient sources talking about a building from that period, and then we find one from that period, if it's not the Mishkan, then you have two buildings of the same dimension from the same time period at Shiloh.
So you're helped by the fact that the Bible is really specific about the tabernacle's dimensions.
Yeah, and now I'll have to say we're not positive what a cubit is. Okay, so the Bible, you're getting these ancient measurements, but what we do know is the ratios of 2 to 1. So like holy to most holy, and that's what our building has. It's divided into a 2 to 1 ratio. So we think a cubit is about 18 inches, but there's questions: are the Egyptian cubits or the world cubit, and the distance between a man's tip of his pinky and his elbow, but not everyone's distance is the same. So, but this is why we're looking at the symmetry of the building, the orientation east-west, and then the symmetry of 2 to 1.
From what I've seen of Shiloh, it's not a traditional site and that this seems to have been heavily populated, but more hence a pilgrimage site. So can you kind of explain why that is helpful in showing that this was a site of pilgrimage rather than where just a bunch of people lived?
That's a very good question. We do not have any domestic structures at Shiloh. We have them in the Middle Bronze Age, but in the Late Bronze Age, we know they were there. There's pottery and everything else from that time period, but no domestic structures. It's not until this building is built in the near the end of the Late Bronze Age, um, that then we see the first domestic structures built at Shiloh. So think about that biblical idea that how can I live in a house while God himself is living in a tent? David expresses that later. So that is not foreign to their way of thought. And so it seems like the reason we're not finding domestic dwellings at Shiloh is they are still living in, God is living in a tent and they're living in tents. And the fact that it's a pilgrimage site, that's what the Bible indicates. And there's archaeologically no reason to question that.
It is interesting. I do think people don't associate tent dwelling and that type of living with wealth. But we've learned from other excavation sites further south that you can absolutely be wealthy, bring sacrifices, live at a fairly high level, but still be a tent dwelling society.
They're in the Jordan Valley today. I have personal friends who live in the Jordan Valley on both sides of the river who have very nice houses, like two-story houses, but they have tents pitched. And most of the time, the owner of the house and the men, they're hanging out in the tent. And if you didn't know this, well, the first time I saw that they had a house, I was just in shock. Why are you, what are you doing out here in this tent? And for whatever the anthropological or sociological reasons for that might be, that's the way they do it even to this day. So when we see an absence of dwellings at a site, or even very small, humble dwellings like we had at Khirbet el-Maqatir, I think we can be pretty certain that they had tents adjacent to them. And this is why I would describe them as being semi-nomadic at that time.
People love treasures. Just give us one treasure.
Well, I just described to you this building, and so it's subdivided, and we're excavating, if I'm right about my hypothesis, then I mean we're excavating even this summer within the Holy of Holies. And so that's about as good as it's gonna get. We get super busy working in the tedious day and all the testing that we're doing, but you kind of have to stop every once in a while and say, this is pretty awesome and very significant. So the building, the gate, and the Favisa, kind of if you take them all together, I'd have to say that's there's not one object at Shiloh that stands out. There's like the altar horns, there's ceramic pomegranates, murex shells and scarabs. So all of them inductively. So it's not one piece of evidence, but it's sort of taking all this evidence inductively and then drawing conclusions from it. Kind of a fun story. We have almost every season people who do come who've struggled with conceiving children and pray and then return less than a year later with children. So I have a friend, Paul Velasquez, who he and his they had been unable to have children. A couple of years ago, he came to the side and prayed, and then their prayer was answered immediately, and now he has a little girl in this case that he named Shiloh. So
That's incredible. And aren't you having a couple get married at Shiloh this summer? So
we
they might be wanting to stave off that prayer for a minute.
well, it's a sunrise wedding. This is Abigail, who's my assistant director and is a friend of yours. You know her well. But she and Clayton, who met through the dig, through TBS and then through the dig. So they wanted to do a sunrise wedding at Shiloh. So the manager of the site called me this morning to just touch base on some things. And she said, so I hear that there's a wedding, that's being planned. And I guess through social media, everybody sees these things. And she said, so, y'all need to make sure to tell Abigail, we have another wedding scheduled for that day, and I'm afraid there's going to be a conflict. I said, don't worry, Moody, there's not going to be a conflict unless these other people are coming at 5:30 in the morning. We're all going to be covered in dirt and have this wedding. It'll be really cool, I think, because the friends are already there, and we're going to give them the rest of the day off. Abigail and Clayton.
That's kind.
Yeah, I know. I thought it was very generous. And then the rest of us are going to go to work.
Yeah, I get that has to be a first. And you don't need a dig permit to have a wedding at 5:30.
Instead of lights, we're all going to throw rocks and dirt up in the air at the end.
It's the definition of a destination wedding for sure. Well, how as Christians can we pray for you? I mean, do you have any specific prayer requests you want us to be thinking of?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. For enlightenment, for focus, there's so much data that we are processing. I want to have clarity. I want to have priority on what we do, resource allocation, and of course, safety for our team and favor that we can be a blessing to everyone that we encounter, and that our work is not just merely academic work, but that it's really represents our King well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Stripling will be praying for you and give the site once more for anyone who wants to volunteer.
digshiloh.org. digshiloh.org. Now, if you get to a site that has a picture of a dog, that's my dog, Shiloh. He has his own website. But if you want to volunteer for the dig, it's www.digshiloh.org.
You did not think about when making a website for your dog that he might beat you in the search engine.
He's a fine canine, I'll tell you that.
My dog's from Israel, so we both have our canine representations of Israel.
Well, these are struggles we have with the Canaanites, okay?
Okay. I just basically set you up.
I was just hoping you would. That was good.
That was the softball question. Thank you, Dr. Stripling. We'll be praying for you, and this is going to be an amazing season, and we'll have you back on once you hopefully are able to pinpoint that fourth corner and all things. We'll point to Samuel was here. Maybe you'll find that. Maybe you'll find that.
If not, I'm sure we'll have wise guys coming along, writing it on pottery and so forth for us.
Yes. It's going to be was like WUC, All right. Shabbat shalom.
God bless. Bye-bye.